Hey everyone. So Portland Tool Libraries, we have a pretty unique ecosystem. So there's 7 independent tool libraries currently in the city. There was, just to run through super quickly, because the boundary system really has, I think, evolved in Portland based on this. I have to give you a little bit of a preview on that. So North Portland was the first one that started in 2004. And they kind of set their boundaries. There's a lot of area in North Portland, and some of it is pretty dispersed. And there's a couple of major highways that kind of divide the city on the vertical lines, which you probably could predict just by looking at this map. And so I think some of it was a little bit arbitrary in establishing those boundaries based on those things and just based on what people's perspective was on that. But because of those things, the rest of the libraries that have come online, Northeast right there in the blue is 2008, 2010 below that is Southeast. So those were the 3 main libraries for quite a while. Greenlentz, who I've been working with, came online in 2013. And then the other 3 libraries you see there, Southwest, East Portland, and the Rockwood Library, have really been able to fill in those gaps just in the last year or so. So it is a growing process for sure, but because of kind of the standards that were set with the initial library setups, we've been kind of following suit. And so it's caused us to have kind of a unique system from places that cover a much wider set of area within each library. We also have a pretty robust system with our different library of things. Clackamas County, which is to the south portion of Portland, Washington County to the west portion of Portland, also have a really robust library of things. Recently found out when I was researching this that they have 837 Nintendo Switch games in Washington, and just also did a little bit of research for my own purposes that you can actually be a member of any of those library systems because they are affiliated. So that's on my to-do list. That's kind of what our library system looks like. Membership is really defined by those boundaries. So you can see quite a bit about how usage adjusts. I think one of the reasons that Southwest was so late to kind of come online is because that is a very much the urban hub. There's more people of means and there's more apartment housing and commercial space there. So it just was not a priority for residents as much over there to get a tool library set up. And I think that's kind of why it took so long to really not only build the enthusiasm for the project, but to find a space for it has been the biggest issue. Portland has seen a lot of change recently. And so it's definitely affected some of us later establishers. North Portland, I don't have a lot of information on right now. They're having a hard time with volunteers post-COVID, or at the current state of where COVID is at, I should say. I don't know if post-COVID exists as a state, but the rest of us, because we use the same tool library and software and we're in decent communication together, I could get some more information. So Northeast Portland has a very sizable number of total members that they've served since being established in 2008. But 2,000 active members is really quite a few people that they're able to support. They are open 3 days a week, 2 weekdays and a weekend. Southeast Portland is open 1 weekday and 1 weekend day. And at Lentz, we do 1 Saturday and then a Wednesday night. So it's kind of that Saturday morning mixed bag of which weekday, but a couple of hours on the weekday is about as much as we're open. And we don't charge membership. None of us do. And I think, again, that's kind of those standards were set early on, 2004, and everybody just kind of moved into that space. It's worked pretty well, is my understanding, for everybody. I'll get in a little bit into why it has been problematic somewhat, but I think the biggest benefits for me, we like the vibe. Everybody who we talk to about it, when we talk to different organizations and community members and volunteers, other people who've been on boards, for over 20 years, we just really appreciate and think that it's very cool that we're able to have it accessible to everyone. It's been great over the last year or so of this collab process to learn about how accessible all of the libraries are with scholarship programs and different ways of of sharing that access. It's definitely changed our thinking at Lents and some of the other areas. It would be nice to have some more reliable funding for some of the things we do. But one of the big benefits of not having a payment system is we don't have to ask people for any kind of money at the beginning. We ask for a donation, or we always accept donations. We appreciate them. And we're able to just kind of roll through that in the conversation. We have a cash box that's available there. We have an iPad that people can kind of scan, but it's a little bit shoddy. So we try not to take credit card payments in the library. And even with late fines and things like that, we'll say, bring in cash next time, or you can go online and you can pay off your late fine. And we find that almost always happens. There's also, I think I talked a little bit about this, and we talked about volunteers, keeping like confrontation situations out of the library as much as possible. And that kind of goes back again into the way we manage fines, especially. If someone really is resistant to offer help, or it seems like they don't have the means, or they're just unwilling to pay it, that's something we can resolve down the road as a board or as an employee, not something that we need to put on our volunteers. We have had a lot of support from the city and different partners, organizations throughout the area who are excited about what we do. I don't know if I can definitively say that they would be less supportive if we were charging more, but people really do seem to love that we're not charging for anything. And I think specifically rent assistance, when you have partners like most of our libraries have, where you're renting space or borrowing space from a church or a different organization, when that organization changes hands, and they may be specifically churches or kind of in a situation in Portland right now, a lot of them are seeing reductions in membership, reductions in participation. And so they're a little bit more squeezed to pay for their services. And so if you are a system where you're benefiting from what they have available, and they see an opportunity there with a new minister or a new church president or something like that, or any kind of organizational structure, I think that opens up a little bit more. In East Portland specifically, they had a spot that they were planning to put a storage unit on for a few months. And then, they had a changeover in the administration in that church building. And they were told that, they couldn't afford that parking space to park a storage container. So it's definitely a thing that can happen, whether or not, you're charging for anything. But it has worked out pretty well for us for the most part. Definitely some very clear challenges. Most of these are probably things you can predict. All of the libraries in Portland, with the exception of Green Lents, really don't offer any kind of other programming. They will pop up and do fix-it fairs occasionally. Really, that's kind of working with partners and participating in things that are operated by the partners. But without that reliable funding, it's hard to develop the infrastructure to do programming. We're fortunate to have a software system that's managed by an individual here. And so that's been really helpful. Costs are super, super low for that. But with the amount of money that we have that comes in from donations and late fines, it would be very manageable to cover it. I think the average for most of our libraries would bring in a little over $1,500 a month. So just general operating costs are very attainable from just donations. Without kind of asking people for things. We kind of choose not to do reservations in some libraries because there's different schools of thought on it in terms of equity. I think we've talked about that in a couple different places within this collab, but giving more convenient access to people can certainly build on that equity, but also being able to stop in and get things first come, first serve is maybe fair, whatever that happens to be. But it just takes quite a bit more infrastructure and employees and reliable communication systems to do reservations, and we aren't able to do that. The biggest problem with not having reliable funding through a membership program or any other funding stream is just loss of institutional knowledge. If you lose an employee because you didn't get a certain grant or a sponsor backs out, there is a very real impact to what's going to move forward when you lose that institutional knowledge. And so you're relying a lot on at-will individuals like volunteers and board members and things. With Green Lents, we have a couple different programs that we run, including a pollinator habitat program and a community orchard. and we've been able to grow the program a bit more. That's been dependent almost entirely on grant seeking. And there is a very real risk with that sort of a funding model that you can kind of have mission creep, where you have to expand your services or your areas of focus a little bit to be able to meet the terms of the grant. And maybe you need to grow some extra employees that you can now afford at this time for them to do the work for 6 or 8 months. And then you don't want to lose employees because we never want to be laying off people. It's not a good way to do business. So it can be a tricky situation if you're really heavily dependent on a grant system for funding. Yeah, just I think this slide is quickly to say there are partners. Portland is a pretty progressive, pretty green city. So we've got a lot of opportunities to partner with organizations that we support, hardware stores that sell consumables that we can work with. We've got a bunch of different and seemingly redundant programs like environmental sustainability, planning sustainability, all these things in the city of Portland, but they are always, getting different sources of revenue and tax revenue and different federal funding. And they will actively seek us out and say, hey, we know you're doing this. We would love to keep, support what you're doing. It's a great feather in their cap as a city. So they will kind of seek us out, and they know that we need some amount of funding. And then late fines, first and foremost, having clear policy. And I think that's something that Steve talked about. I talked a little bit about that with having those policies in place when you're doing your inventory management, but really giving clear guidance so that and the volunteer is working, they can, cite something to show people why policies are being changed. They vary a bit for different tools at different libraries. At Lents, we do all for $1, but Northeast will charge $5 in late fines for a lawnmower, for example. So having kind of a sliding scale in some of those things. Specifically, I think things that, like Tim had said, things that are going to require more infrastructure, more space to fill, so that you have enough inventory for people. That's really where you want to incentivize quick returns. We do an annual checkup for members. The system automatically prompts people to do an annual checkup. It's required to be filled out and updated. And mostly that's because we have this system that involves boundary lines. We want to make sure people are using the library that's closest to them. That helps with tool recovery and maintaining a supply of tools that's sustainable for our community size. We do revoke privileges, but it's pretty rare. If your tools come back late, it'll automatically kind of shut those things down, and you need to have administrative access to go in and restore those privileges. But generally, if you're in communication with us, we let you do renewals. We let you do as many renewals as you want, but we do say after the second or third time, really, we suggest you bring the tool back and then let other members borrow it and come back and get it when you're ready to actually do your project. But specifically Northeast Portland, they've got a really unique system in my mind where you have to have the tool. You have to bring the tool in physically so they know you still have it in order to get a renewal. And you have to do it in the first hour that they're open. So it's a very, very strict system. And I don't know exactly what the impetus is for that, but it seems to work really well. They got 2,000 active happy members. So what seems crazy to some people, clearly works for others. The biggest thing in terms of revoking privileges for us is if you bring back a tool and it's busted and you're not remorseful or not willing to even have a conversation about what happened or what you might have done wrong, or if you're able to pay for it. Again, we try not to bring the financial into it. If they don't offer to pay for it, we're not going to ask you to. But if you clearly broke it and you're not remorseful about it, thanks. This service probably isn't for you. Have a nice day. We've never had to actually stop providing services to members because of lack of funds. Now, again, as I had said earlier, there are impacts to losing employees and having to change structure based on that lack of reliable, consistent usage-based funding like a membership system. But we've been able to keep costs very low. I think it is possible. I'm not saying it's the best system or that it's the system everyone should strive for, but if that's organizationally what your goals are, it is possible. But it can be really hard, I'm sure, in a city like Toronto to find the space to do it. In a lot of places, Portland gets trickier every day. So specifically in COVID, because our costs were so low and our operational costs are almost negligible, we most of the libraries didn't operate for up to 6 months. Lentz, we really had a very strong set of volunteers that were committed to coming in and masking, and we would go in the library, get things, bring them out to people. And we even had a email communication system where people could let us know what they were going to have. So we were able to pivot and do that. But being able to adapt to those needs without worrying about not being able to pay our rent was tricky. So I think as low overhead as you can manage, that's good. But yeah, it really depends on kind of what your cost environment is. And then real quick, this is a lot of what kind of Keenan had said. 24-hour access for volunteers, really trying to build up that volunteer base because we can't do anything without our volunteers. We have partnered with some maker spaces and things like that, service providers, and some small businesses like coffee shops and things in the area to get discount codes for volunteers specifically, and then lifetime membership. I actually live 40 minutes outside of the Green Lentz service area, and we expanded our area, but I'm still about 2 blocks outside of it. But I'm still a member because I'm a volunteer. So if you've put the time in to establish the library, we're happy to have you come in and borrow tools. The Rockwood Common project, we are able to kind of work with the city of Gresham, which is just outside of Portland, to open up this cabinet making shop. And the plan there is to leverage those resources and make them still shared resources for the community, but to leverage business partnerships and other partnerships in order to pay for those things. So we can still provide the tool library as a free service to the community, but being able to work with, following a couple of different makerspace models that are in other parts of Oregon, working with community colleges, pre-apprenticeship programs, things like that, so that we can make it funded and sustainable. And then really thinking about the millworks and the wood shop and stuff like that as a tool that can be borrowed by the community. And if you have the means and it's supporting your business, factor that into your business costs. But if you're not, and if you're an individual and you're going to be using it at smaller scale, we want to make that as affordable and accessible as possible.
All right. Thank you for that. Definitely interesting to see how, just at the beginning, thank you for showcasing all of the different kind of regions where those libraries are situated. Can you just talk about how strict the membership to those locations is? I saw some places where there was overlap in coverage, but how strict has each library been about community lines? And do you feel like the amount of offerings is equitable between those the different libraries are offering?
We're not very strict. I personally am not very strict. Different libraries have different opinions on that. So I can't speak collectively to all of them. And I think it really ends up being kind of an individual thing if there isn't a written policy. Our written policy is this is the zone. You need to be in the service area. Again, part of that is because of what already exists. Redundancy is kind of the biggest concern that I've seen that holds the most weight in conversation. If it's a redundant service, it can be harder to get funding, specifically from some of those partner organizations we had talked about. Tool recovery is kind of the other thing. If you're really far away, if you're a 35, 40-minute drive outside of the city, I don't expect you're going to make it a priority to get this tool back promptly. And we really don't have the means to recover those tools. So if you want to borrow a hammer, yeah, maybe we can talk about that. But if you're looking to, borrow a table saw or a lawnmower or, 15 tools to do this project that you're working on out 45 minutes away, that's probably not going to happen.
You talked about the various different ways of gathering additional income, that are not membership dues. Can you talk about specifically, let's say for Green Lentz, where your core funding is coming from?
First of all, like for the tool library for Greenlens, our cost is extremely low. We have a $1 lease, and we just need to keep the utilities on. And so that's the library. Fines and donations cover the cost of the library. I just want to preface it with that, because any financial issues that Greenlens has had, to my mind, is because we have many other programs that are much more complicated in terms of writing grants, reporting on grants, and filling all that out. So the majority of our funding by far comes from grants. We do a pollinator habitat program that involves a lot of coordinating with service providers, plant providers, private homeowners. We did some air quality work at one point, some GIS mapping, some pedestrian pathway work, a lot of different things that are really great for the community, and we're really happy to provide those things. But those are the kind of things where, as your organization grows, if the funding environment changes, you have to be ready to let people go and adapt and shrink back down. And that can be kind of difficult, especially with, employees that have been with you for 4 or 5 years. We do also have a few partnerships, specifically with like workshops and those pollinator habitats. We work with nurseries and a couple different city departments, and they work with us pretty well to help us find the funding we need to keep those programs running. Recently, the city of Portland reached out to us and said, hey, we want to support your program for 3 years. So give us a budget projection. We're going to put it into a federal grant that we're applying for watershed. And so we submitted that. We won't know until the middle of the summer if we got that. So we're kind of operating on hope and a prayer right now. But that would be obviously huge.
Can you speak to the different size of the populations that are covered by each one of the Portland tool libraries?
Yeah. So Northeast Portland has a lot of industrial areas, and there's an airport up there. There's a funny little pocket on our map where there's just a gray area. That's because that's the airport. Nobody needs to have tool lending general area, but it's mostly residential, like I had said, on the north and the east side. East Portland is extremely residential, more high density housing, and it tends to be lower socioeconomic. So that's part of why Greenlens expanded and almost doubled our service area in 2019, so that we could service more of that community. We're really glad to have East Portland Tool Library coming online so that they can kind of contribute to more of that area. But yeah, Southeast Portland is a lot of rental properties. And so it's interesting to see how many consistent active members they have, and what a large base they have, and what a relatively low drop-off rate they have for active members compared to how many have enrolled.
In any service situations, right, where you're running a business and there's members or customers or users, like there can be issues that come up, between those, that maybe there's expectations of the service, and there's expectations of the patrons, right? And those expectations are not always met, and it can lead to frictions either that blow up and are very acute, or that can fester over time. And wondering if there have been situations that you've had to work through to address those with members, and did they come through positively?
So we do have the late fine system, and I think that's probably the predominant lever that we have. In my mind, I don't see how like a membership cost would kind of function in a lever in that way. But I think we do have a late fine system. We try not to be, again, punitive about that. We try to encourage people to understand it's about being a good steward, about being a good neighbor. If you're following the rules, then you're never going to have to pay anything. But if you're going to bend the rules, if it's more convenient for you to bring your tool back too late and not answer an email, then it's going to cost you a little bit. If you want to think of that as a donation, that's fine. I'm happy with that. Happy to have your money. It helps us keep the lights on. But yeah, I would say we haven't had a lot of issues with it for the most part.
Yeah. I mean, that's helpful to hear. I mean, understandings that's generally the case across the space, but with any of these types of sharing projects, especially when there's not the same type of a fee structure involved, there can be a lot of fear from folks that are starting these projects, that these types of things are something that they're going to have to deal with. And while everyone should be prepared for situations that come up and be, know that they could happen. It's always nice to hear that for the most part, most people show up and are good stewards on both sides of these projects. And that's not something that needs to be feared quite so much.
Right. Yeah. I will say that we have had at least one volunteer that I'm aware of that was a little more pushy and punitive in terms of fines and things. And we did have to kind of ask them not to volunteer anymore. We didn't say you can't be a member, but if you're not representative of the voice that we're trying to communicate to our community and our members, then it's just is not the spot for you.
Yeah. And then just a final question here from Claire, wondering if you feel like you may need to change the membership or financial structure at some point in time in the future, and or is that something that's been talked about kind of on the board level?
Yeah, we have been talking about that quite extensively at Green Lens. We recently had a executive director who had to leave because it just wasn't sustainable, because with that employee position, they were also in charge of chasing grants and adapting the organization to fund themselves. And that's just a lot of stress. So we're talking about having a membership system kind of, but really still thinking about it as these are donation tiers. And that's something that we've gotten from y'all. There's a lot of different organizations that phrase it very well and have very good systems that I think we probably will be mimicking. But yeah, I really like the model of having a business rate for small businesses. We do have a few landscapers and small contractors that'll come in and borrow a few tools, and you can tell from the way they come back and the amount of dust on them and stuff like that, and how frequently they're borrowing, that like either you've got one heck of a house or you're doing a lot of work for a lot of people. So those people I will kind of say, hey, and they'll also often say to us, yeah, I left the tools at a work site, so I'm gonna have to pay you an extra late fine. And I remind them that if there's extra work that's you're putting into these tools, that's extra cost for us to have to replace it. So please consider, donating some of that income to help, this operation keep going for both of our sakes. Because if the library can't stay open, your business, it sounds like, might not either. So
thank you for that, Jason, and thank you everyone for joining us and sticking around until this point. Clearly, this is a very rich conversation, and there's a lot of factors that need to be considered when one sets up their membership structure, and how they set their relationships with members. And it's been really helpful to hear 3 different ways of doing that. So really appreciate that.